The worst year for a lot of us for our mental as well as physical health. So joining us this morning is best-selling author, coach, and fitness expert, Lisa Goldenthal.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa G, your host. You're at the top of your game, yet the game is changing faster than ever. Strategies that got you here aren't the ones that'll keep you here. The pressure is relentless, and the fear of obsolescence looms large. That's why I'm here. Welcome to the new podcast series, Disruptive, How to Be Gritty and Unlock Performance. This is your chance where I sit down with today's tops in business, mindset, wellness, and success to help you master disruption and thrive.
Thanks for coming, and I'll see you soon.
Today, we have a story of unbreakable will, survival, and the power of the human spirit. Imagine this. 1 minute you're walking in your office at the World Trade Center. The next you're engulfed in an inferno, consumed by flames, your future rewritten in a single moment. This is the story of our guest today, Lauren Manning. She was one of the most severely injured survivors of September 11, 2001, with over 82% of her body burned in the attack on the Twin Towers, given almost no chance to live, but through sheer force of will, relentless resilience, and an indomitable spirit, Lauren fought her way back from the brink of death, enduring months in a coma, dozens of surgeries, and years of grueling recovery. But this is not a story of tragedy. It's a story of triumph. Today, Lauren is an author, speaker, and inspiration to millions, proving that no matter what life throws at you, the human spirit is unbreakable. Her journey of grit, perseverance, and unwavering refusal to give up, and her lessons on resilience will change the way you see your own struggles. If you've ever faced adversity, if you've ever wondered how to push through impossible pain, if you ever doubted your own strength, Lauren's story is a wake-up call you need. I am beyond grateful to welcome you to the podcast, Lauren Manning.
Thank you, Lisa, and for that really lovely introduction. Much appreciated.
Oh, I am so thrilled to inspire my audience with your story. So take us back to that morning. What do you remember about seconds before your life changed forever?
Well, it's interesting in that each of our lives are punctuated by primarily the banal, right? Things we don't necessarily recall other than the hopeful movement forward beyond them. But on the morning of 9/11, that was, needless to say, not the case at all. But I had come off an evening before where my husband and I had a pretty intense discussion on some changes in career that he was contemplating that spilled over a bit into the morning, and along with some other issues involving the most tertiary of things, a key and access to a rental home that we had, I was delayed. And so that morning already had set itself in a remembrance because of annoyance. I was getting out of our place late, and we lived in the West Village, a little less than a mile from the World Trade Center. And I had and do have right now, he's just 24, a 10-and-a-half-month-old son. And I hugged him goodbye and left, tried to grab a cab, and was fortunate enough without waiting too long. And by the time I made it down to the World Trade Center, I was rushing to get out of the car, fumbling with coins. These were the days before credit card slides or, Uber. And so it took me a few moments and hustled out of the cab into One World Trade Center. And I made a left toward the elevator banks. And on the right were two women in an animated conversation. I remember waving at them. And as I turned toward the banks of the elevators, suddenly there was this incredible and imperceptible sense of movement, as if the entire building had somehow jumped. And a moment later, a wall of fire blew out of the elevator bank, enveloping me, and I was spun around in an instant. I could not breathe. I could not move in that instant. I could not imagine what was actually happening. Momentarily thinking this can't be real. And obviously it was all too real. And within a second or so after realizing that was going to be what was set out for me that morning, and I'm making it sound trite, but it is an improbable thing that our minds are able to do. It's either one of two gears. You either sink into the moment and everything slows down and you become hyper focused on what's in front of you, or in a state of incredible calamity, you might just pass out. I guess the way I was certainly raised and through other experiences I had, I geared down into thinking, what do I do now? How can I get out of this? So I struggled back toward the elevator doors, and the the breath of the fire was just pulling me and pushing me back toward the elevators. And at some instantaneous moment, as I was reaching toward the exit, I saw the two women who had been laughing just moments ago laying on the floor burning, and something released. The windows blew out. I was able to, in what was a vast gush of wind, both run and be pummeled through the doors and the broken glass area. And I was spit back out onto the sidewalk where I'd been, just moments before getting out of the cab. And at that point, I was on fire. And there is not a lot of greenery in downtown Manhattan. And the nearest spot where there was potentially any place I could drop and roll that wasn't cement was across West Side Highway, which was multiple lanes with a divider in between. So I started to run across and eventually made it to the bank, where I did what we all learn from the time we're really in primary school. You drop and roll, and you never imagine you'll be confronted with something like this. But there I was, and I was just doing things from, rote memory and instruction. And within several minutes, a few people ran to the bank, those that had gotten out of the building and others who had come to potentially help them. And I don't mean others, many. There were a few people that were struggling across in this mass explosion that had just occurred above them. And they were in civilian clothes. Their bravery that day was everywhere. And with all respect to our men and women in uniform, these were our fellow citizens. And one of them was from Lehman Brothers, ironically, which is where I started my career, in the Lehman Brothers training program. And this fellow came by, and I was screaming, "Get me the hell out of here. I've got to get out of here. I've got to get up to Weill Cornell." And in this moment, this incendiary space of absolute mayhem, trying to figure out what to do, he said, "Just don't look down, don't look down." And a few minutes later, as we were both looking across the street to see if there was any chance of an ambulance or an EMS truck, saw the second plane hit World Trade II. And in that instant, that idea that maybe this was an accident, was no longer a possibility. I had been there in '93 as well during the first attack on the Trade Center. So it wasn't anything that we didn't give due consideration to. I think many of us that worked there, the chance that there would be another terrorist attack, and now it was quite evident. So as that really began to just increase, the level of smoke and objects beginning to fall and steel wailing, There were people jumping out of windows from high above, and I worked on 105th floor of World Trade One, and it was pretty evident that those were, I'm sure, many or some of my colleagues. And the only chance to escape out of the area was to either have this guy get his vehicle, which seemed improbable based on where he had parked. And none of this was happening in a thoughtful way, by the way. This was a crazed
I can't
frontline
imagine.
situation. And
Yeah.
finally, an EMS truck seemed to pull up, and it was still quite a distance away. And it yielded really my only chance. And so I made it back over there uh, improbably. He helped guide me, but it was under my own automation, which was just a remarkable feat. And not, I say that with the greatest of humility, because that is really, in essence, the story of not only my survival, but everyone's survival, both in business and in their personal lives. And only moments before that EMS truck had come, I had prayed for death, but the pain was so intense. I certainly did not believe that even death would release me from just the ongoing, burrowing, deepening pain from an extraordinary burn. And when we made it over to the ambulance, there were people filling the sides of it, and there was blood, and it was gritty, and it was, as one might imagine, it's portrayed very graphically, both in movies, and we can see it in any other type of cinema, what happened that day and in filming. And I was the last in, and like roughly handled onto the floor of the truck. And I ended up at a downtown hospital, which, with all their best intentions and efforts, I was completely awake as the burn just burrowed deeper and deeper, and without any proper care, sadly, because the people that were there were on the phone with Weill Cornell, which is a burn center here in New York, and they did not understand the protocol and the massive area of burn, and they were floundering. And to be part of a space within a space where you are devoid of agency, despite what you are saying, you are diminished in this incredibly prone position. And it led me in that moment to become even more angry, but to no avail. And during that time, and then I'll lap this forward, but it's really important, I think, when we consider what we each can do in life. There was a social worker there, and the smell of burnt flesh was prolific. I was later told, and she realized that it was improbable that it would probably ever get out of there. And so she took that moment, not being able to do anything personally, to pray. So she went down to the chapel, she prayed, and she walked out to the entrance doors, and there were people lined up from all over the city. Don't forget, many people thought there'd be many survivors. And in truth, there were many who were not injured or nominally wounded, but the true catastrophic wounds of those that were a part of it numbered very few. And so the hospitals were not overwhelmed, but people were standing ready to serve. And she yelled out, "Are there any burn nurses or burn doctors here?" And miraculously, two women who were on a holiday from Minnesota stepped forward, and she said, "Get on in here." They scrubbed up, they scrubbed in, they knew what to do. I was intubated finally, which is a kind of twilight sleep, an induced comatose state, but only a light one. And I was given more proper medication, and most importantly, attendance to what is the largest organ in your body, your skin. And if you don't handle it correctly right away, the chances of infection and death, which already put me in single-digit odds of living, pummel to nearly zero. So at that point, it wasn't until later that evening when the city realized, they're the survivors, they're not coming, the people
Oh
are
my gosh.
primarily dead. And no one wanted to admit that truth. I think at that moment there was grand and strong hope held out, but it did allow a lifting of a ban on movement through the city. And I was finally ported up to Weill Cornell, that burn center. And that's where the real care started, and what was a real MASH team, a semblance of professionals, and what would be months long in coma and just pain that did not subside literally for years, and is something that I live with, and sadly open wounds for many years, and the need to learn how to speak again, to walk again, to interact with a world that in so many ways had moved on, but I hadn't. And my biggest challenge was to reassert a sense of agency. Who was I? This
Right.
body did not seem to be mine. It wasn't remotely mine. And you are thought of and seen in the diminutive, and I don't mean that in terms of size, but if you consider someone who's elderly, who may have aphasia or Alzheimer's, who is gravely wounded or disabled in any way, there is this unconscious bias that exists. And if we don't catch ourselves, it's really easy to succumb to. So there was that element coupled with the pure sorrow that so many felt when looking at what this terror had wrought on, a fellow loved one, or a fellow citizen. The outpouring from around the world and throughout the U.S. was extraordinary, but there was kind of a sadness and a sorrow in so many of their eyes and in their words. And what I defined was that I would not be, what I defined was that I would live outside of that body. I would not inhabit that scarred, in so many ways mutilated space. And that if I believed myself a more whole, and I thought of myself as a whole person, but in a more perfect sense, able, that they would somehow see beyond the scars, and they would see me for who I was and who I believed throughout it all was the same person in so many ways.
Right.
And, it took a long time, but I went through a long preamble here, but and I'll stop myself, but I think it's an interesting comment as I think about it. Number one, thank you for listening and giving me that space. That is certainly an aspect of a good leader yourself.
Oh,
But it's
thank you.
also hard, and there's a bit of a rush to want to get through this, because on that day, um, as much as it was about my own pain and my own fight for what would be, more than many years and certainly a decade to really ground my survival, was the face of the incredible loss I felt for all my colleagues and coworkers. I was a partner at Cantor
Oh
Fitzgerald,
my gosh.
and we suffered the greatest losses that day. 1 out of 4 who
Oh,
were murdered were colleagues and people I had worked with, and I'd been there for years. And in the position that I had, I knew many in the firm, many, and then considered them close friends. And, we shared weddings and parties and celebrations together, and it was just devastating. And so I committed my life, in many ways, obviously to my son, to be there as a mom and as a wife, but I committed my life to really avenging all of those very, very brave men and women that day who I'm sure fought with all their might to help and try to save each other against all odds. And here I had that chance, and that's how I live my life with every day. I do have a sense of the grace of the present, of what is really this gift to be here.
Well, you are my hero. I remember meeting you briefly in New York, and I was like, this story has to be told to my audience because everybody has problems. And 2020 was hard for me, 2025, but I was from New York. When that happened, I'll never forget. Obviously, nobody will ever forget where we were in that moment. And I just want to unpack just a little bit your grit, and given your 18% chance of survival or even less, what kept you going? Because people are not built like you, Lauren Manning. Nobody else has that kind of grit and perseverance.
Yeah, I think what kept me going, Lisa, was a combination of factors. Um, One is who I believed myself to be just through various life experiences. Um, more recently, I guess, right as an adult, I was working on Wall Street, and it, there are many businesses that are difficult. This one is prototypical in many ways. It was not always a warm and welcoming place for women overall. And
Right.
to succeed, you are really um, 90% of any business on the street and in finance is geared toward revenue generation. You can function in support thereof, but unless you're generating revenue, um, you generally don't survive. And so it's a really simple equation. And when you're doing well and you're
Yeah.
managing and you're building a business, um, you're on top of the world. And literally, I was on top of the world on 105. But when that isn't happening, it is a really difficult situation. And I think the fear of failing just held me a lot more tightly than anything else. And I didn't see myself that way. And so on this day, um, I guess through the way I had been brought up and through generations and generations of family service in the armed forces, um, and just a lot of tenacity through my mom, a professional who gave up aspects of her career to dedicate herself as a full-time mom to three children. I thought, well, there's really nothing that can't be accomplished. And if you keep your mind focused on the interim goals and a daily plan, you can create the macro strategy. But the reward of the day-to-day accomplishment is what helped fuel me and kept me going. And so on that bank that day, minute to minute, and less than 10 minutes before the first trade center collapsed, World Trade Two, that's all I was thinking about. How the hell am I going to get out of here? I knew they had come back and I was not going to die on the side of a highway. So
Oh
my
my
first
gosh.
goal was to just get off the highway. And then it was to get out of the first hospital into the second. Thankfully, it was lights out for a while, but the pain was so broad, so intense
Oh my
that
gosh.
the amount of painkillers was extraordinary that was needed. And even with them, I still experienced the bite of what had happened. And so it was a continual kind of race to outrun the pain and to somehow believe, truly, I believed that there would be something better to come. And the pure embodiment of that was my son. And I was not, a young mom. And so when my husband and I had this little boy, he meant everything. And to return to him meant everything to me. So I had some good driving forces and rewards to look forward
Oh
to.
my gosh. You are like the coolest person that I've ever met because we all think that our problems are insurmountable at times, but I've never met anyone with more grit, more perseverance, more like unstoppable spirit that in of all the people I've ever met. I want to dive next into how did your experience change this perspective of feel and failure? You're now an author, speaker, and a beacon of hope for so many. What message do you want people to take away from your journey? And if any, do you have any advice for people who feel broken? Recently, obviously, we've had these fires in California and people are struggling right now. 2025 felt to me like it started off like 2020. And how can everybody find their own fire to fight back with your kind of strength?
Yeah, I first have to acknowledge just having friends out on the West Coast and seeing uh, the terrible devastation and what happened in the hurricanes months before in the Carolinas. And here we all were on the heels only a few years out from the COVID, situation. And before that, the financial crisis of 2008. I have to say, no matter how old you are watching this, we've been living through some uh, auspicious and crazy days. And with that as the broad map, um, the thing that I have found for me that works most effectively is to just slow down for a moment and engage with what you're doing, engage with yourself, with your body, and the actions and interaction with the other. Any opportunity we have to look into the eyes of another human being, to see their hand, to see as they're swallowing the movement in their throat. This may sound very awkward, it's not. To see the way they walk, the way they move, the way they hold themselves, what they're saying that may or may not be reflected in their body actions is this supreme and really sacred opening into what is this this humanity, this fragility that we all live with day to day. And what I've encouraged my son to do, although he's want to listen, I sometimes have zero value, that's for sure, is just, and that includes my younger one who's now 15, which is a whole story unto itself, but is take a moment and actually look at the vulnerability and look at the extraordinary happening that stands or sits across from you and realize that that making of whatever we are doing together, whatever you're doing in concert with your spouse, your child, a team member, broadly your organization, or whatever line of work you in, whatever line of work you may be in, is is a chance to give someone something unexpected and to receive it. And that's the blessing of acceptance, of seeing the foibles, seeing the fragility, seeing the pain or the hope, or the promise that someone has, and to empathetically and truly engage with them. And that is a really hard thing to do, to closely listen to someone, to narratively um, take what they are able to give you and to relate to them wherever they may be. But in doing that effectively, it allows us to understand and has allowed me to figure out how can I better motivate the people that I have the good and great pleasure of working with, and how can I better serve my own needs by serving them? And
Wow.
that I think it's just this subservient to subservience to the other, and realizing they have goals and they have issues. And I mean this on the highest of professional levels. And if you can kind of dive in and grab a piece of that and really hold it for a moment, you're going to see the actions you take and their response be very different, because we all ultimately come, you know, in prone positions of wanting to do better, succeed more, get more accolades, get more compliments, be stronger, be more able. And within all of that, we each struggle with that other side, right? Am I that good? Can I be that good? Is someone better? Did I say the right thing? Did I
Yeah,
do the right
definitely.
thing? As like Joan Didion had said years ago in her first essay, and in many ways, so many people sense it's the alienation of self. It's the alienation of our own self. And so you have to respect yourself wherever you stand, or wherever you sit, however able-bodied you are or not. You own the moment. And that is what I've really tried to highlight, both for myself as it tripped out, but it's that unmeasured strength, right? That exists in all of us when we least expect it. It's something we have. It's a matter of activating it. And it can have incredible impact, both on what you end up doing and what those around you do. And it's quite magical, really.
Well, thank you for that gift of hope and the message that you've shared about being more present. It's such a gift for me to have a conversation with you, because you are the most present person I've ever talked to. And and it's so true. You never know where someone else is coming from. And oftentimes, listening skills are really a struggle for people. So being present and being the beacon of hope that you are. Where can people find you if they need you to be a speaker to inspire people?
Oh, well, um, they can find me through go to laurenmanning.com. And that's one way. Uh, my primary focus these days, and I speak with many, for-profits, nonprofits, corporations, etc. But a lot of my focus has been dedicated to the world of narrative practices, and where I founded, along with several colleagues, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of narrative practices, which basically are and is the act of much of what I've been talking about here. Better finding ways to better connect people, whether it's through health literacy, whether it's through patient-provider relationships in the continuum of healthcare challenges that we all face, just in getting, a general intern, or whether or not you might need some specific help. And that as providers, many doctors and many others in the world of health care suffer from, which is the connection to their jobs, let alone the patients, and the level of burnout, the levels of increased, sadly, suicides and attrition from many of these positions. We see burnout, and whether it's in the fields of academia, corporate, or healthcare structures, it is replete throughout many industries. And so what we are doing is really elevating and advancing the fields of these professionals who provide consultation and methods to allow groups and organizations and teams, whether it's Silicon Valley or a local college, or a team working on the development of a new vehicle, to work more efficiently together and more productively. because that open channel of sharing and that narrative communication is, without it, what hinders most groups and companies from succeeding. And with it, driven by good leadership, allows incredible success for those that actually get it. And so we're part of at Narrative Mindworks helping people get the power of narrative work.
Wow. Thank you for explaining what Narrative Mindworks is and for all the work that you do. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you as a guest on the podcast. LaurenManning.com.
Thank you very much, Lisa.